Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I just got back from LibertyCon, where I gave a talk on inequality. This is a talk I've given before, but as with all my talks, every time I give it, I update, because there's new data available. There are new ways to talk about things. And I was in the process, this would have been about a week ago now, updating a chart that I first created, I want to say 10 or 12 years ago. And this chart, I'll put a copy of it in the show notes, but it shows the fractions of American households in each income category that census records. There's like 10 of them, and they run from $15,000 up in increments up to $200,000 and over. The numbers are all adjusted for inflation. And when I showed this chart for the first time, it would have been around 2010. I said, look at this fascinating pattern. The year after year, and the chart went from, at that point, 1970 to 2010, so whatever that is, like 40 years, I guess. If you look at the pattern, year after year, the fraction of U.S. households in the poor classes declines, the fraction in the middle-class households declines, and the fraction in the upper-income households, $100,000 and above, are increasing. And again, this is not...
The middle class is disappearing, Ants.
Yeah, it's disappearing. And it's not because of inflation. This is all adjusted for inflation. First time I did this was 2010, and I've updated this chart a number of times since then, the most recent time last week when I took it up to 2022, the last available year. As I'm building this chart, I'm recalling myself saying to the audience back in 2010, wouldn't it be interesting if this trend continued? And it has. This has now been going on for close to 60 years of middle class shrinking, poor classes shrinking. Where are they going? They're becoming rich. There's so much data here that we can easily extend it forward another 30 years. Now, keep in mind, this trend that I'm telling you has been running for over 50 years. We only need to go 30 years more, so we're more than halfway there. 30 years further, following this same trend, in 2054, 1/2 of U.S. households will be in the rich classes, and only 10% will be left in the poor.
That's actually pretty interesting, right? Because you can see this playing out. If you divest yourself of preconceived notions, you can see it playing out. And yet, at the same moment, what could we say about the price of housing and the availability of housing and the ability of people who are getting richer to purchase homes?
Yeah, but see, that's an interesting thing, because I posted this graph that I'm describing, and a number of people came back at me with that. Well, but housing is so much more expensive. I'm here, hang on. I'll sound like James. Hang on, pumpkin. You're talking about the price of modern housing. If you want a house like people had back in the 1970s, you can get it for a song and a dance.
I'm just saying that, look, people are getting much richer, stipulated. I see it. It is happening. And it might not do them as much good as we think.
No, I think it does them a lot of good. And that's my point.
Of course it does them a lot of good, but it might not do them as much good as we think.
I think it does do as much good as I think. It doesn't do as much good as what people think because their expectations are so much different.
Well, when you say, 50% of us will be in the rich classes, that brings with it certain expectations. And I think it's clear, if you look at the data, that yes, 50% of us will be in the rich classes. We do have 50 years of data. There is a clear pattern. You can extend it out and without some sort of calamity, right? Like World War III or a nuclear strike or a virus that destroys us all. If normal life continues, yep, that's what's going to happen. And yet the expectations of being wealthy might not be met.
Yeah, but see, I think it's the expectations, because the wealthier we get, the further up we set our expectations. I've got a cell phone here. You've got a cell phone. All my kids have cell phones. In fact, by the numbers, 97% of Americans have cell phones. 30 years ago, not even 30, 20 years ago, that was a luxury. Not everybody had one. But today it's just expected.
Yeah, no, 20 years ago, I didn't have one. And it is expected, but, you start thinking about things like housing, and you say, okay, in 30 years, you're going to be wealthy. Well, but you're probably going to be able to afford a raised ranch in suburbia. That's not exactly wealthy, is it?
It'll be a much nicer raised ranch than today's raised ranch in suburbia.
Of course it will, but I just have reservations. When you say 50% of Americans will be wealthy, I think we're probably not looking at what we consider wealthy right now.
It doesn't feel wealthy when everybody has what you have. And I think that's the problem.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, right? We all have expectations. And if you tell me that I'm going to be wealthy in X number of years, well, first off, I can't wait for those years to pass so I can get there. And then I expect the kind of things that I think about when I think about being wealthy. Anyway, you want to talk about somebody else who doesn't know what things are going to be? We have to talk about Donald J. Trump, because poor Donald Trump, he's being prosecuted criminally. I am not going to offer an opinion.
Oh, hang on. Pause a second. He's being prosecuted criminally. This is not a civil.
No, I'm talking about a criminal matter. It's from, election stealing or denying, however you want to put it, all the way up to the January 6th business, which some people think disqualifies him from ever holding office again, and other people think make him a hero. Let's just set all that aside for a moment, because Donald Trump made a rather novel claim in a court of law that a president has immunity for anything he might do when he's president.
All sorts of federal employees are covered by limited immunity, right?
Well, let's settle down. Let's not go that far. I mean, we don't have to make this reasonable. Why don't we just ask the obvious question? What if Donald Trump murdered a political opponent? Is he immune from prosecution?
No, clearly not.
Well, clearly not to you, but the argument that he's offering says that most certainly he is. Because he's saying, no matter what, a president is immune.
So he's claiming a level of immunity that even prosecutors don't have.
Oh, yeah, it would make them blush. It's so ridiculous. But as luck would have it, a D.C. Court of Appeals, the U.S. Court of Appeals for D.C., was quite unanimous when they said, we cannot accept that the office of the presidency places its former occupants above the law for all time thereafter. Bravo, bravo. I hardly ever look at a court of any kind and say, oh, thank God. But oh, thank God. And you can bet that this nonsense is going to the Supreme Court, or at least Donald Trump will try to bring it to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court had any brains at all, they would say, no, this has already been decided. Thank you. Please go away. We'll see what happens next. I mean, I'm not saying I think there's a chance in hell that limitless immunity for presidents and former presidents is ever going to be on the table. It most certainly is not.
Well, one could argue that the executive branch itself has made the opposite claim in the form of Ford pardoning Nixon. If indeed there was immunity to being president, there would have been no need to pardon Nixon.
That is correct. I just want to point out that this happened. It wasn't the foolishness of the week.
I forgot. I assumed that was the foolishness.
It probably should have been, but it just wasn't, because it's kind of serious. This is a serious thing, and these arguments are serious, and they will yield very, very problematic outcomes if pushed to their limits and accepted. The more balkanized the American public gets, the more they split off into Team Red and Team Blue and decide that anything their teams do is just fine and whatever the other side does isn't. This is the idiocy that you're going to get, and it's dangerous idiocy. The foolishness of the weekend is going to, I don't know who to award it to. It's just kind of a general situation that's emerging around mixed reality headsets. Have you been following the mixed reality headsets?
No, a friend of mine just got one.
One of the Apple ones for $3,500?
Yeah, I don't know how much it is, but it was, one of the Apple ones.
Stanford University's been looking into this just a little bit, claiming that if everybody's going to want to mess around with this sort of thing, perhaps academics should consider what's going on with them. And don't you know, there's all kinds of problems with these headsets. I just want to mention some of them. You get this idea that all of reality looks like a funhouse mirror, that your depth perception is a little off. But the nice people at Stanford wanted, quote, to understand the implications of living a life in which we rely on pass-through for hours every day to see the world around us. And surely that's going to happen, right? This is an early iteration of this technology. And most normal people, A, can't afford $3,500 for a toy that's going to make you sick to your stomach, and B, don't want to look like a moron walking around with what is essentially a Q-tip head, right? No, you don't want to do this. But sooner or later, I can guarantee you that not one of two things, but that two things are going to happen. The first of those two things is that these sorts of appliances will become indistinguishable from regular glasses.
Right.
You're going to put them on, and nobody's going to know that you've got what you've got because it's just going to look like a pair of glasses. And then, not too terribly long after that, people will get implants.
Yes.
They will just experience this at the brain level. I make no prediction and I have no opinion about that, except for this. If you do that, you're an idiot. But we'll get to that.
I'm signing up.
Later.
I'm signing up. I want an implant so badly.
I bet you do. And you know what's going to happen? I'm going to get control of that implant. And I swear to God, I'm going to turn you into a silent vegetable. You laugh all you want. I'm going to do it.
I was talking to my friend who got this, and we were talking about the fact that the Google Glass, when it came out years back, and we both thought it was a really cool technology, but there was this social blowback that people who wore them were regarded as asses. I don't know why. That was just the way they were regarded. And he was saying, I hope that society has changed and this new Apple thing will be accepted.
It has not.
Well,
no,
yeah, accept it. Well, that was my initial reaction. And I said, well, hang on. There's an example. Do you remember when Bluetooth earpieces first came out? It was the same blowback. The people who wore them, whether they were driving or walking around the grocery store, they were just pretentious and that. And now everybody's got, in fact, most people have two of them in as they're walking around.
That's not a communication device. I'm listening to music.
A lot of people are talking on the phone.
Well, and they're all assholes. That's a private thing. And you know this. You've seen me do this. I think you have at least. I will insert myself into those conversations. When people are having conversations on the phone at pitch volume in airports, I sit right next to them and I engage in that conversation with whoever they're talking to.
But my point is there was a societal change and people accepted the Bluetooth thing. And my guess is that if not this iteration, the next one, they're going to accept the glasses thing too.
I don't know. The Google Glass got some blowback primarily because it was impossible to tell if you were being recorded by it. That brings up some problems. But, you know, we're probably going to work those out because we always work those out. But here's where I'm kind of annoyed with these people because now you know what they're complaining about? Social disconnection. They're all wearing bandages around their heads, walking around like a pack of fools, thinking, oh my, I've become socially disconnected. Take it the off. And that, my friend, is the foolishness of the week.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
Here we are talking in January of 2024. Can you believe it's 2024?
Every year we get farther away from 2020 is good news for me.
I guess that's right, but we might be right back at that doorstep here. We've got an election coming up in November, and look, Joe Biden is 81 right now, and Donald Trump is 77. And they are both very obviously failing. Mm-hmm. Only the most ardent partisan can look at one or the other of these two fools and say, oh, no, he's firing on all cylinders. No, they're not. Neither one of them. Joe Biden, it's like a gaffe an hour with him. Every time he opens his mouth, something crazy comes out of it. And Donald Trump, for those of you out there saying, yeah, he's way better, he confused Nikki Haley for Nancy Pelosi last week.
I read something about that. Yeah.
I mean, I guess awful woman is the category in his mind, and it doesn't matter who's in it. I guess there's a new person in it right now, a woman who got an $83 million settlement against him.
$83 million.
That's lotto money right there. And the beautiful part of it is that he was assessed that fine because of his bragging about how wealthy he is. And now he's claiming he doesn't have that much money. So he was lying one time or the other.
Yeah.
My guess is both, given how things work. So, look, we've got a couple of guys right now running for the office, a repeat of the last election, an election that nobody was really all that thrilled with then. And somehow or another, these two fools are back right where they were at the top of their respective tickets. Well, there's a lot to say here. First, if nobody wants this election to happen, why is this election happening?
What do you mean by that?
Well, everybody says they don't want this election. They want two other people.
Right, okay, I'm with you, yeah.
But we're not getting two other people, which means that the voters don't want two other people.
Well, okay, maybe it is the voters. I keep thinking that leaders in the parties would, now I don't know what you can do with Donald Trump, but certainly leaders in the Democratic Party could convince Biden not to run.
Well, they would have to convince him. It's not like they could just pull the string. If you're a sitting president, are you going to just take a victory lap and quit? Joe Biden does not seem the type. As a matter of fact, I don't know who seems the type. I think what we're seeing right now is the problem of too much democracy, not too little.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we've got these guys running for the office, and for whatever our stupid reasons, we opened up the primaries to be this democratic system. Why are we having primaries anyway? What on earth makes us think that we need regular people to decide who the nominees are going to be? And before you lose your minds and call me an anti-democrat, well, I am, small d, anti-democrat. But before you lose your mind and walk down that road, can you plausibly make the case that we get better candidates now than we did when they were chosen by the so-called smoke-filled rooms?
Part of what's happened is we've become fixated for more than a century now with this idea that everyone's vote should count equally. I get where the sentiment comes from, but practically speaking, for example, we're here in the primary phase of the thing. Each person doesn't have the same knowledge of who would or would not make a good candidate for various reasons.
But it goes so far beyond that, right? If you look at the American electorate, I think you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that at least 20% on either side of the aisle are absolutely crazy. Mm-hmm. They're absolutely crazy. What evidence do I have? Well, I've been down a QAnon rabbit hole trying to figure out what happened in the last election with QAnon and all this nonsense, and the one before that, for that matter. And we have a significant number of the American public. I want you to really hear the words I'm about to say. They legitimately believe that the world is run by a left-wing cabal. I mean, I should have already lost you. Mm-hmm. Every rational person has already checked out. But they legitimately believe that the world is run by a left-wing cabal of satanic pedophiles who drink the blood of babies to maintain their strength.
Did you say 20%?
Yeah.
Good God.
17% of the American public thinks that that's probably happening.
Is that a serious number?
It's so serious, as a matter of fact, that QAnon candidates ran and won seats in Congress. I give you Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Sure, yeah.
If this is what enhanced progressive style democracy gets us, right? We have to democratize everything right down to the choosing of candidates. Well, it's not working. If the two best candidates in the country are Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you're choosing candidates incorrectly. Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is the second election in a row in which these are the two best candidates in the country. I am kind of at this point writing off any possibility that Nikki Haley pulls this out.
Well, it's the second in a row that we've had these two candidates. But I say there was a third one, that election between Hillary and Trump. And to show how far things have gone, in comparison, I think Hillary's a reasonable candidate compared to these two.
Let's not go crazy here.
But the Hillary versus Trump election was the first election in which it was apparent to me that we were no longer voting for the person we wanted. We were voting against the person we didn't want more.
And look, there's always an element of that in every election. I'm fine with it. I mean, yeah, your vote is for, your vote is against. You can construe it however you want. But how the hell have we ended up at a situation where two abject clowns end up running for the office? And we all line up and say, well, you got to vote for one of them. No, I don't. I absolutely don't. I don't think I'm wasting my vote if I don't. My vote is wasted no matter what, if these are the options. But what was so bad about having the parties choose their own candidates? Not through this Byzantine series of primaries, but just as a party.
Now, when you say as a party, you don't mean everyone who's registered as a member of the party, but you mean the party leadership.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, could Abraham Lincoln become president today? Could FDR become president today?
I would imagine that anyone who comes across more centrist is going to have trouble. They're going to have trouble because who comes out for the primary election? It's the extremes on both left and right.
That's right. But, Lincoln was no centrist.
But he wasn't a crazy person.
Lincoln was anti-slavery at a time when slavery was the defining factor in American politics. There are problems here, right? Could George Washington become president today? I don't know. But in any country in which you have a George Washington and he's not running the show, you're not doing a particularly good job of filtering through your candidates.
Now, you've got me going down an interesting thought experiment. Which of our historical presidents, and let's maybe stop at Barack Obama, but Barack Obama backward, which of them could win in a primary today?
Hell if I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if Obama could win under these circumstances. He might be able to. So too Clinton, maybe. And, looking back on it, I was never a fan of either of those two guys. But boy, they look refreshing by contrast, don't they?
Yeah. Now, remember, we're not talking about the general election here. We're talking about the primary. Do you know what fraction of Americans vote in the primary?
I don't.
I don't either, but it's markedly less.
My best guess is 15 to 20%.
Yeah, well, yes.
Maybe more, given that, you have to also remember that courts all over the place have weakened primaries, right? So you just saw this in New Hampshire, where Democrats and independents were allowed to vote in a Republican primary.
Yes.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if a primary is something that a party undertakes to determine who its candidate will be, why on earth do you let people who aren't in the party vote in it?
Yeah.
Now, that can be ridiculous, and the whole system can be ridiculous simultaneously. I don't think I've contradicted myself here. You've got that look on your face.
I have a numbers look on my face. And I have this site, and God, I love this site. I got to plug it. And I don't know how you pronounce it. Statista, I guess. Statista, Statista. And invariably, when I Google some esoteric thing, Statista always comes up top of the list. And you can get for free a tremendous amount of data from them.
Can you just get to the point?
But some stuff you got to pay for. But this is partially free. What I'm looking at is voter turnout rates in presidential primary elections. This goes by state, so I don't have the overall for the country. But the top is Montana with 45%.
19 people live in Montana.
But here's the thing, 45% of eligible voters turned out, and it goes down from there. I get down to, let's see, a big state. Here's California, 37% of eligible voters vote. Now, if we go back to your statement earlier that 20% of the people are crazy left-wing and 20% of the people are crazy right-wing, well, that's 20% in each party. And if you've got a state like California where 37% of the voters turn out, and combine that with the fact of who's more likely to turn out, are the people who are more viscerally involved. That's the crazy people.
The math all works.
Yeah, so you're left with, I would not at all be surprised, a situation in which for either party in the presidential primary, the majority of people who are going to be voting in that party's election are crazy people.
It might be right.
And so you get to the general election, and what do you have? Two people who were picked by crazy people.
You know, I love watching South Park when nobody's in the room, and it's giant douche and turd sandwich for them, right? These are their two candidates, and how is that not right?
Yeah.
Trump has been convicted of some pretty horrible things, and he's going to be convicted of even worse things. And that proves to the people who want to vote for him that he deserves their vote. Why? Because it's all a put-up.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is a sham as far as they're concerned. So you're left with the ridiculous sight of the born-again Christians saying that Trump is anointed of God. Meanwhile, he's been ordered to pay $80-something million in addition to the $5 million he was ordered to pay last time for defaming the woman that he sexually assaulted. Now, these are legal judgments.
Well, I think there's another force at work here that pushes in the same direction, and that is the media, and I'm not going to blame the media here, I'm going to blame the viewers. The viewers want salacious stuff, and so the media goes after salacious stuff. What happens is reasonable people who are flawed, imperfect, just like every single one of us, look at this and say, there's no way I want my life dissected the way the media is dissecting those people. So I'm not going to run. Who does run? People who are shameless.
Shameless is the right word. And you take a look at Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, for God's sake, he's a serial plagiarist. Claudine Gay over at Harvard's got nothing on Joe Biden. He cheated in law school, got caught, and claimed he didn't know that it was wrong.
Do we know this is a thing?
Yes, he took the life story of a British politician, Neil Kinnock.
Oh, I heard about this, yeah.
And just declared it to be his own. And, you know, this is in the days before the internet, so we had to wait for 60 minutes to put it all together. But it didn't ruin his career. Why? Because the truth doesn't matter to partisans. Mm-hmm. Partisans don't care how bad their candidate is. They only care that he's their candidate.
Right.
Donald Trump said, I could kill somebody in the street in Manhattan and I'd still get elected. He could. And that is to the eternal shame of all of us. And now, because of our failings, and these are our failings, we are going to have to deal with these two clowns again, and we're going to have to deal with the outcome, and neither outcome is acceptable.
Talk about how we got here, because this wasn't the case 100 years ago, 150, even 40 years ago, it wasn't the case.
The forces were set in motion 100 years ago with the Progressive Era, when we decided that everything had to be democratized, right? When we take the election of the Senate away from state legislatures and make it a popular vote, for example, things like this. The undercurrent is that more democracy is good and less democracy is bad. But what was the founding of the country? What was it precipitated on? And it was exactly this. The people should have a say in their own governance, just not in every aspect of it. We have a democratic republic, and we filter out the purely democratic elements of self-government out of the mix right from the get-go. And the minute we started rolling that back, we started suffering the problems of a multitude.
Let's identify this, because I find the history of this fascinating. The House of Representatives was supposed to represent the people. That's the way it was designed. The Senate was not. The Senate was supposed to represent the states and not be elected by the people of the states, but elected by the legislatures of the states.
That's right.
They were to represent the state governments, not the state people. So we changed that. And every general election now, people start yelling about the Electoral College. The Electoral College was not supposed to be a rubber stamp. It was supposed to, we elect the Electoral College and they go and elect the president.
Well, let's just say it had a purpose.
It had a purpose, which we've largely turned them into a rubber stamp. We've turned the Senate into a glorified version of the House. And so you get kind of like the least common denominator. That's what gets elected now.
You get exactly what you deserve. I say it all the time. Sooner or later, people get the politics they deserve. And here we are. The chickens are coming home to roost. It's even worse because Joe Biden is 81 years old and we've got Vice President Kamala Harris. Take a look at what's likely to happen there. I'm not being mean here. I'm just saying what's likely to happen. And she might be the most despised politician in all of America.
On both sides of the aisle. Yeah.
With good reason. She's quite horrible. We have no idea what kind of imbecile Donald Trump is going to show up with. I can hardly wait. Let's just say I'm pretty sure he learned his lesson with Mike Pence, and they're going to vet people a little more carefully next time, because Mike Pence did not do what Trump wanted him to, that's for sure.
Do you think, let's suppose for the sake of argument, that Trump actually gets the Republican nomination?
He's going to get the Republican nomination.
Well, two questions here. The first one is, what happens when we get a decent number of states not allowing him to appear on the ballot?
I don't know what's going to happen there. We're going to have to wait for the Supreme Court to figure all that out.
That becomes very strange. You're in effect asking the Supreme Court to, well, one way to look at it is to say you're asking them to call the election, because if they come down the side of, yes, the states can leave him off, then that's it. Game over. Biden wins.
Careful. He's only being left off the ballot in states he was never going to win in the first place.
All right. That's fair.
It's not like he's not getting on the Utah ballot or the Mississippi ballot.
My second question is, let's suppose he actually wins the general election. He's back in office. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. The first thing he does is pardon himself for these various things that he's been convicted of?
Well, he can only pardon himself for federal crimes, if he can pardon himself at all.
Mm-hmm.
I would make the case that he can't pardon himself. You can't pardon yourself and still serve that end. He can't pardon himself for state crimes. That much is crystal clear.
Sure.
And almost everything is in a state court. The whole thing is just ridiculous. And we're going to have to suffer through it. And then we're going to have to suffer through a number of years after it. And my suspicion is that things continue to get worse before they get any better, kind of like with almost everything else we talk about. I don't see things getting better in the United States for a long time.
What do you mean by a long time?
Maybe past our lifetimes.
Okay, so a couple generations.
Maybe.
And do you think, I'm going to ask you to speculate here, is every time you get some movement like this and you get a backlash, the pendulum goes too far the other direction, do you think we end up multi-generations down the line, let's say a century down the line, having gone the opposite direction where the people are basically disenfranchised?
Oh, that's a word I don't even use.
Well, do we get to a place where we've cut democracy back so far?
No, because I don't think you can cut it past where the Constitution leaves it. And that would be fine. Returning to the original formulation in the Constitution of 1787 would be fine. No problem whatsoever there. But, leaving it where it is now, or falling victim to this idea that really the only thing that will make it any better is more democracy still.
Right.
Which is, I think, an idiocy that we might fall for. Things are not going to be great. And they're not going to be great for a good long while.
Before we close, let me remind our listeners, because I think this is so incredibly important. We're talking about problems with the Democratic-Republican primaries. Let me remind our listeners that the Democratic and Republican parties are not constitutional entities. They aren't even governmental entities. They are non-profit corporations.
Yeah, if you hate corporations, start there. On that happy note, I'll talk to you again next week at some point. Take care of yourself, and much though it might be a difficult thing, let's be nice to each other out there. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person. One person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.